Today, we will be speaking of software architecture for growth. And so this has a more technical side, but also a business side and a people side. And we are really curious to see what our guests have for us today. This session is being promoted by Scala Porto, the strategy from the municipality of Porto to support the development of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the city. It will be run in English because it will be made available after this session closes online, and we want to share it with all the community. And the session is being promoted together with Porto Tech Hub. And to speak with you a little more about Porto Tech Hub, we have here Luís Silva, the Vice President from this association. Please, Luís, do you want to explain us a little bit more about Porto Tech Hub?
Thank you, Daniela. So Porto Tech Hub is basically, as you may know, the association regarding technology here in Porto. It was founded in 2015 with only 3 companies. Nowadays, we are more than 25 companies. We have 2 major goals. Unfortunately, COVID is not helping right now with that, but basically the 2 goals that we have is to make an impact regarding technology here in the city of Porto. And by that, we are doing a post-graduation course in the technology university here in Porto. We created this post-graduation for people that are not into technology to be relocated and to make a switch, as the name expresses, to enter in the technology career. We are now in the 4th edition, and it's going really well. And thus, we also have a conference, international conference regarding technology. This year we didn't promote it, but we are eager to say that the 2021 is the year that we're going to have a big conference regarding technology. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy, and it's been a pleasure to work with Scale Up. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Luís. So as you understood, this organization represents the tech companies in the city, that's mostly bigger companies, more established ones. And we know that this knowledge that these companies have been gathering is very important for the smaller companies as well, so they can keep growing in a sustainable way. And that's why we are promoting this together. And to share more about this infrastructure, this tech infrastructure for growth, we have here 3 special guests. We have Jorge Silva, who is a principal software architect at Blip that runs millions of processes every day, so he must know a lot about these processes. We have also Ricardo Monteiro, head of web gaming team at FABAMAQ, which is a scale-up here in our ecosystem as well. And to moderate on all of these, and because he's the one to make the right questions, not Luís, neither I. So Gonçalo Queirós, who is the head engineer at Infraspeak, and Gonçalo, I'll just hand it over to you. Before that, we have received a lot of questions from all of you. Thank you so much for your questions. Our guests have worked in your content to deliver what you are here looking for. But if you have some questions, please drop them on the chat, and Gonçalo will be taking a look so he can include your questions as he goes. Please, Gonçalo, now the floor is yours. And well, up to you.
Okay, thank you, Daniela. Thanks, Porto Tech Hub and Scale Up Porto for doing this kind of events, and a special thanks, of course, to Jorge and Ricardo for being with us, and the community. Without it, we wouldn't be here. So let's kick this this conversation. I will start with Jorge. We have here, I think, a clarification to do. People would like to know what's your role. What do you do on a daily basis? Do you Do you use clean architecture by the book?
Hi, Gonçalo. Hi, everyone. So first and foremost, let me say that I don't know if I know a lot. I certainly have some scar tissue to show, and what I'm going to talk about is my personal experience, and I hope it's enjoyable. So my role on a daily basis, well, that's an interesting question. It depends, honestly. It depends on the stage of the projects where I'm in. It depends on the project that I'm in. I've kind of outlined this in bullet points in the sense that the project can be something that is kicking off or can be something that is in flight, right? So if it is kicking off, what's expected of my role at the company where I'm at is essentially meetings with stakeholders to gather, document, and digest requirements. That's a big one. Be part of the ideation process in the sense that it is expected that I debate ideas, that I contribute to ideas, and that I listen to ideas. It is also the right time to be spending on translating requirements. Hopefully, being able to compile a comprehensive list of requirements, so that in the end we can build something tractable in terms of design. Understanding constraints and expectations. This varies with certainly not only the project but also the company. By constraints, I mean technical and non-technical, functional and non-functional, and also expectations, so we don't over-engineer needlessly. Things like socializing the design is also important, making sure that all stakeholders, specifically senior ones, understand what's going to be delivered and make sure that we align expectations. Making decisions alongside with the team, which technology stack to use, infra details, operational day-to-day, governance models, this kind of stuff, and documentation. Documentation is important, not too much, not too scarce, but documentation is important. If the process is the project is in flight, mainly monitor, adjust, communicate, and manage expectations. Monitor by reviewing code, making tactical merge requests here and there, adjusting to shifting requirements. That happens a lot, so we need to adjust. Adapt to things that we missed during the kickoff, and yeah, keep the documentation that we wrote up to date. Otherwise, it won't be of any value. Do I use clean architecture by the book? No, I'm afraid not. Maybe I'm a bad example. I have a couple of notes. Maybe Ricardo can comment on them as well. I think that not all problems are the same, and when they are, the constraints more certainly are not. For instance, the same problem can be handled with different amounts of time, money, knowledge. So I don't think that a book can be read as a cookbook. It must be read like something that we need to be critical and mindful of, and we should adapt our own needs. So having said this, a little bit about the book. It's really always on the back of my mind. I think that when you reach some degree of expertise, you implicitly use some of the guidelines there, and you know when to use them, when not to use them, and adapt them. So this is it. So just as a conclusion, my experience is that role has a strong technical side, but also a cross-cutting human side to it. And I think that the role can be successfully played using a variety of styles. But success is when both sides, both the technical and human, meet and exist in balance with each other. That's been my experience.
Okay, thank you very much, Jorge. Ricardo, you have the stage.
Thank you, Gonçalo. Hi, everyone. My name is Ricardo Monteiro. I work at FABAMAQ. I will talk a little bit about my background in FABAMAQ. So I joined FABAMAQ 9 years ago. At the time, I started doing some front-end development, creating a game engine. By the way, I work in a company that creates casino games and all the software necessary to run them, which is a lot. The games are the easy part. So I started doing the game engine. Then I was invited to the backend team. Eventually, I assumed more a management role in the team, which is where I am currently. So my daily basis is pretty much similar to Jorge, which is we have some product that needs to be done, so we need to define that product, manage the expectations, all the technical part, make sure that the team is within with the information necessary to perform that product. Documentation obviously is also important, and so on. If we use clean architecture by the book, well, as Jorge, no. This is the simple answer. Obviously, that we try to have some basis when we start mainly doing a new project. If there's a project that it's in flight, it's in production, we try to adapt the new features, the new requirements to the existing architecture. But when we start a new project, we obviously have some ideas, some experience from the past that we use to provide a guideline on what we will try to do. But in reality, that basis often changes, and that has to do with new requirements, new features, new expectations, the deadline itself. So having a basis is very good. It helps us a lot, but eventually we'll start to do our own custom architecture.
Okay, great. So I think you are your role is very similar, and yes, it involves a lot of tech, but it sounds to me that you clearly need to interact with people all day and listen to their requirements, etc. So I think this is a nice link to our next question, which is, how do you keep everyone on the same page, Ricardo?
Well, communication, basically, being in oral form or on the documentation. Documentation is very important. It might not sound when we started doing the development part, it's quite annoying to do the documentation part, but it helps the one that it's developing and future members that will go through that code. So that is a very important part. And in the beginning, obviously, we all discuss all the architectural decisions and communication through everyone present. During development, we often do some presentations, some minor presentations, and the more the scope is tight in this part, the better, because you don't want to give everything out at the same time, because it's too much information, and that information will be lost. So if you try to reduce the scope and communicate and transmit what we are doing in a specific part, all the better, and everyone is on the same page. Those are the main aspects of keeping everyone on the same page, in my experience.
Okay, nice. And Jorge, how do you do at Blip?
Yeah, Ricardo mostly mentioned everything. If I have to add anything, it's really onboard people and their ideas in the solution as well. Make sure you empower people. You may have your own personal beliefs and your personal ideas, but be open to other ideas. It's really, really important. And mostly, I don't know, celebrate success. It's an important one. I've seen really, really nice projects getting done right and nothing happened. And it was a missed opportunity in my experience to make people, well, on the same page with regards to objectives.
Okay, so a great software architect actually is a great, or should be a good people person, not only a great tech lead. Nice, interesting ideas. So, and moving on to our next question, Ricardo, what are the indispensable aspects that a software architect for growth should contemplate even on the MVP stage?
Well, simplicity is the main part. Start simple. You cannot predict the future. We can try to do. I will start to go into another question, but it's relevant. You cannot do long-term predictions. Well, you can, but often they are wrong. When they are right, you're a genius, but they are often wrong because if you try to do the architecture and all the development taking in consideration what might happen, you will lose a lot of time in the early stages, and that's something that the stakeholders don't like. No one likes it. You want the product to be as soon as possible in production. So basically, this is a company and you want to make money and you want the product making money as soon as possible. But that simplicity should not, what's the word? Impedir.
Stop.
That's simple. Thank you.
No problem.
Some flexibility on the project. And there's a simple example that I will give, which is if you start to do an authentication development to, for example, Facebook, there are several parts of that component that you can abstract and make it general. And you know that, okay, I'm going to authenticate with something, and you should develop that part. And then after that, you should develop the Facebook authentication. So these are things that you can predict because, and it mainly has to do with experience. Someone that doesn't have any experience with this will probably try to do all the development for the Facebook, and will not abstract it. But as you move on, as you code more and more, you will realize that some parts are abstract enough to have its own space, and then do the specific parts. But try to keep it as simple as possible in the beginning. There are other questions here regarding monoliths and microservices. I would recommend always starting with a monolith, and then as needs are required, then you start to strip some parts to microservices or remain in a monolith. It all depends on the context. And the context should be as simple as possible.
Okay. Jorge, do you have anything to add?
Maybe when the business is already well understood enough by everyone, coming up with a common language and terminology around what's being modeled in software helps. And if software is able to use the same terms and constructs, it's easier to go from and to the code easily and enforce it through all layers, meaning you can have a monolith that can be split into many different processes. The code base can be super large, or you can have a microservices oriented architecture with tens of or even thousands of services. If the terminology, if the lingo is the same, it's easier to go from one place to the other. That usually helps.
Okay, I was smiling because we actually have that problem where we rename things and then you have product lingo, customer lingo, development lingo. So that resonated with my own experience. So, and Ricardo told us that we should keep things simple from the start, which is a great introduction to a question that someone did, which is, how do you keep it simple?
Okay, so if the system is small enough, you will be focusing on software component level, right? So in that sense, you can invest in clearly defining domain boundaries. So what is account gets in its own package, what is business related to whatever function of your business may be in its own package as well. That helps. Thinking about how they depend on one another also helps. You want to make sure that things are, well, as decoupled as they can be. You want to layer software correctly in the way that it mimics what the software actually does. So if it is a web app, you'll probably have a presentational layer. If it is an API, that presentational layer is mostly transport. I don't know, it depends. If you are thinking about abstracting transport in different or many transports, consider modeling your software to accommodate for that. Design by contract helps. Design by interface helps a lot. If you build around solid interfaces, you can fence the technical debt, which is a question later on, behind interfaces, and that usually helps. You can use technology to your advantage there, like using the right language idioms and the right libraries, so on and so forth. I'm a big fan personally of design by contract. I rarely use it. I don't use languages that have that built in, but I think it helps a lot. Other stuff that's important. Ricardo also already mentioned, don't overcomplicate, resist the urge to generalize early. You probably don't understand the business that well. So don't try to predict stuff. Don't try to foresee stuff. Specifically, if you are in a public limited company, predicting what the customers want or will want, or how the business will progress. If you know that, please mail me. I'd be interested in that. So limiting the blast radius is also important in the sense that if you know that a particular part of your software component is prone to, I don't know, unbounded input or something like that, don't let that specific component break the entire system or the entire service. At a system level, involve people early and often. This is where I feel things get more complicated. It's when you have to talk to people. Inform them how your component interacts with their dependencies. Be a good netizen, to use the term. Be humble and accept that your landscape may not suit your ideas very well, and vice versa. You may be very well intentioned. Maybe that's not what the business needs. I don't know. That happens to me. And that's absolutely fine. And at the business level, just involve stakeholders in a feedback loop. They are probably not interested to know that your API is able to withstand, I don't know, 50K TPSs, but they are pretty much interested to know that the logging process went from taking, I don't know, half a second to be really, really instant. Then I jotted down a couple of notes at a personal level, which I think are important in the way of making a simple start. Is you probably have an opinion and you probably have tight bonds to it. When your opinion is not the end state solution, don't take things personally, to be honest. Pick your battles. Don't stretch yourself too thin. Know when not to sweat the details. And be systematic with your time. There's a known principle, the Pareto principle, which states that 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort. And that's pretty much there, spot on. So pick your battles.
Okay, great. Ricardo, do you want to give us your input on how to keep things simple?
Yeah, basically it's what George said. We just had that define a small set of rules in the beginning. Don't try to predict the future. You won't be able to. And even if you try to predict and something that makes sense to you, it might not be used in the future. So just keep it simple. Small set of rules in the beginning, and then allow the project to evolve and make decisions after that evolution.
Okay. And so we have here another question regarding the premise. The author of the question actually called it a false premise of we will rebuild it later. So how do we keep things simple and then we deal with this premise of we will rebuild it later? Ricardo, do you have any insights on this?
Well, to be honest, I already said this phrase a lot of times, and most of the times it isn't true. It's not realistic. We have good intentions. We basically, sometimes we are in a deadline. We have to respect that deadline, and we cannot do the correct thing or the perfect thing from the start. And we always think, okay, I'm not going to do this now, but in the future I will somehow rebuild it. That's often not the case. So my advice for this, it goes back to the same thing. If you keep it simple enough, you will be able to rebuild or refactor the code eventually. In this case, there are other things to take into consideration, which is convincing whoever is in charge, our chiefs, our stakeholders, that we will need some time to reduce some technical debt, which obviously it's not visible to anyone. So many people don't take that into consideration. We that are in the background, that we know how things work, how things will evolve, and the problems that we will have in the future, know that is important. So here comes a part that we have to convince others, or as you were saying a few moments ago, or a few minutes ago, we have to have people skills to convince our superiors to allow this time to rebuild. My advice is be as honest as possible, telling everyone in the chain of command exactly how things are, exactly how things will be in the near future, and the importance of that refactor.
Okay. Jorge?
Yeah, whenever possible, when you encounter yourself in such a situation where you hear we will rebuild it later, try to design your system so that won't be necessary. We will be talking about techniques to make that possible in the next questions. So I'm personally not a big proponent of rewrites, and I've rebuilt my fair share already. I'm more confident that if I had a business, I wanted to rewrite tactically here and there, and I honestly think it's possible, even at pace.
Okay, great. Jorge, what advice would you give to a junior backend developer that wants to learn more about software architecture?
Yeah, I like this question because I was one myself not too long ago, yesterday. So what worked for me, and this is what I can share, is practice. Practice a lot, practice by doing, practice by reading, not only theory and books, but code. It's amazing how you will develop a taste for good solutions, and they will come out naturally once you are exposed to different ways and different ideas of implementing the same thing. Implicit knowledge is real in the sense that how many times have this happened to you guys? You don't know how to explain why something is wrong, but you know that it is wrong and someone shouldn't be doing it, and you just know it. That's called implicit knowledge, and it's real, and it comes from experience and from your sensorial system. I don't know how to call it, but yeah, it takes practice. One thing that was hard for me to get is understanding where the value comes from. So I believe that we all agree that coding in 2020 is mostly a commodity. We are in the times of local platforms, pre-built solutions, ecosystems that allow me to spin up a site even without understanding what CSS means. What I think someone who wants to go about software architecture should invest in is things that are not a commodity, like quality, systems thinking, and integrative thinking as well. These are buzzword terms, but go and have a look. They are something that's not too often found in our industry. And learn now and when to scratch your coding itches. Sometimes as an architect, you won't have time to code. Accept that. Understand how you can scratch your itches. And yeah, shameless plug, it's advent of code time. Go and have fun. If you're an architect, it's a good time and a good exercise to do after work.
Okay. Ricardo?
Yeah, I would just like to reinforce what George said. It's like practice a lot. There are no secret formulas here. You need to practice and practice and practice. Also, taking a look at some source code of popular projects, you can usually pick up some programming skills or practices that they do and see the patterns in real life. So that's also useful. And obviously read books, the boring part, the theoretical part that I hate, but it is needed, even if it isn't so that you have a good basis. And basically that's it. Practice a lot. That's the main thing.
Okay. George, just one thing. What's the advent of code that you just mentioned?
Oh, it's the most wonderful thing. So it's a month full of nice little puzzles. There's 2 a day, and by the end you will have a surprise. But it's really coding challenges, pretty small, 1 per day.
Okay, so I guess you just Google advent of code, and you should find it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Good. I will check it out. Okay, so moving on, we were just looking at how we will deal with challenges in the MVP stage. So and I think the better advice that you gave us is to keep things simple and don't try to overcomplicate and predict the future. So and then we need to scale. Okay, and when that time comes, Ricardo, how do you evolve legacy code bases when it's time to scale?
It depends a lot. From my experience, I'm involved in several projects, and one of them, it's a monolith that we needed to turn some parts of the code into a service. And on another project, which was more like a macro service project, we needed to merge some of those services into one. And this has to do with the difference between the monolith and the microservices part, which is a monolith is easier for deployment, and microservices is easier to develop and keep everyone with a single task or a single function within the project. So this depends a lot, and it depends on basically on the experience that you have. Evolving legacy code bases. I don't have a directive here. It's just too abstract to define some rules on this. As I said, I'm in 2 different projects. I have 2 different orientations. So sorry, this is my best answer.
No problem. Jorge, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, like Ricardo said, it's an hard one. So, I put a couple of bullet points here. Understand business requirements, understand why we need to scale, what needs to scale. Sometimes it's not all of a specific monolith or all of a specific microservice or all of a specific library. Understand the system, how the information flows, understand components, how they work, and what can be break down into smaller pieces. Come out with a plan and socialize it. That's really important. Understand what's being done and by when, and what are the expected goals or KPIs, and execute it. Just do it. Ship it as fast as you can.
Okay. Great. So, how do you balance speed and technical depth while the company is growing with limited resources, and how do you architect trade-offs with business?
For me, this is a really interesting and at the same time really hard question. I have mixed feelings about the technical depth concept. This is possibly a controversial theme. From my experience, I haven't been able to 100% say that speed is the cause for technical depth, or at least the cause alone. There's probably correlation, but not causation there. But it certainly exists, and it has been managed. I just think it can assume several shapes, and it depends on the project and the people you're working with, and yeah, a lot. So having said this, I think that how do we balance speed? So keep things small. Practically, this can be componentized and focusing on really small bits that can work together, and high technical depth behind these small components, which I like to call interfaces. Focus on quality integration. Make sure that bad components don't compromise the whole. Examples of good quality integration means using terms like defensive programming, solid error handling, retry logic, if that applies, something like that. When bad components can be contained, well, you're in a world of trouble. And the only thing that I've seen working here is Boy Scout rule, is when everyone in the team fixes stuff as they see, when they have that culture, or at least keep a tab of where the problematic points or where they are. One thing that helps is making it forefront. So if it's not written, it does not exist. So if it is only spoken word, developers that this is technical debt or something like that, it doesn't exist. It will be neglected, that's for sure. So write it and put it forefront. Monitor your code when in development. Monitor how the list grows. It should plateau at some level. It won't be ever zero, but it shouldn't be growing at an unbounded rate. When in production, being able to attribute the downtime to a technical debt piece is worth $1 million. So if you can map between what you call technical debt to business value or to value, that is worth $1 million. So try to associate technical debt to real customer goals. If that happens, most likely your backlogs will be filled with technical debt stories to fix. Yeah, and if you find anything else that you should get creative, report back, because this is one of the areas where I think there's a lot of work and investigation to be done, to be honest.
Okay, thanks. Ricardo, do you have anything to add?
As George said, this is a very difficult one, and it all depends again on the context. How to balance speed and technical depth. Well, if someone here has a formula for this, I will appreciate it if you tell me. But basically, it all comes down again to the beginning, where things must be simple enough so that it is possible to change quickly also. And there's also the other part that always provide some time in your roadmap for some technical depth reduction. You obviously, a company wants to put their products in production as soon as possible, and always wants to add new features so the business can grow. But as a technical engineer or a software engineer, you have to convince people that, okay, we have, for example, 6 months of roadmap. Let's reserve at least one so we can reduce some things that are not as right as it could be in that month. So again, some people skills are needed here also to convince others that this is necessary. Otherwise, there's a good analogy. Imagine the ship, and the technical depth is the anchor. You can have a few anchors on that ship, but the speed will be very slow eventually for the ship to move forward. And basically, that anchor is the technical depth. So you should also take in consideration in your roadmap that some things need to be changed and some things need to be worked out.
Okay, great. So very quickly, Ricardo, is there between a monolith and a microservice?
Sure, whatever you want. Well, a monolith is something, as I said before, is something very easy to deploy, and a microservice is very easy it's hard to deploy. It's the more microservices that you have, the difficult is the more difficult is the part of the DevOps team, for example, to deploy that project. So if there's anything in between, well, it depends on your definition of microservice. What is micro for you? It's something tiny. Some service that only deals with a single responsibility. But that's not the case. That's not a microservice. A microservice is something that can be contained, have a specific boundary and scope in what it is entitled to do, and it shouldn't do anything else. And if you respect this, everything will be okay. That microservices can be a huge project, even if everything makes sense in that part. A monolith is everything contained in the same service. Anything in between, it's whatever you want. It's whatever you want and whatever you want to call it.
Okay, Jorge, very quickly.
Yeah, I really love that idea that we can have a microservice-oriented architecture comprised of monoliths. So that's really true. So yeah, a monolith is not something indivisible. It's a whole that gets deployed as such, and ideally, yeah, nothing to add to what Ricardo said. That's really good.
Okay, I have a good friend of mine who I think will coin the term, which is big enough services. Okay, so moving on, we are running out of time. I would just want to have a quick question before the conclusions. So I will ask you to be brief. Jorge, what are the telltale signs that software is fragile and not architectured for growth? Are there any?
Oh, there are lots, and I guess it depends on how you look at it. Apologies. So when the business is often hampered because of technical details, that's a smell. When your business can't grow because technology A, B, or C doesn't allow for that, you don't want to be in that position. When responsibilities are scattered in multiple places and implementing a change involves changing multiple code bases, the code or the cost to change this skyrockets very easily. When implementing a change is slow or hard, or only a few people can change it, that kind of specialization is something that you could address or can address with architecture. When you hear the words rewrite, refactor too often, and when they are actually right, that's not a good sign. I've also been exposed to scenarios where it takes ages to sunset a component or part of the system, and that may mean that the component is just too complex or no one has knowledge about it, so we can go about doing it in a different manner. And yeah, one important tidbit around this is sometimes the architecture reflects the company or the culture, and it's the art to it sometimes. I think it's part of our job or our role as architects to make sure that doesn't happen, that the architecture actually is able to support the company, not being shaped by the company.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ricardo?
Yeah, basically what George said. Yeah, I agree with everything.
Okay, great. So moving on to the conclusions, I will jump. I'm sorry, I can't. We don't have time for all the questions that we have. So I will pick two from our conclusion. What are your main pains, Ricardo, when designing architecture?
Well, being too general and implementing features that are not yet required is obviously inefficient and costly upfront. And that investment may never have a return if the predicted requirements do not match reality. On the other hand, being too pragmatic and only implementing exactly what was required without looking ahead will potentially, with new requirements, can be even costly and inefficient in the mid or the long term. You know, there's always a balance here between simplicity, flexibility. It all depends on knowing very well what you have to do. Not only now, you have to, for example, go to the product owner and tell, okay, I have to do some things right now, but in 6 months, what are the expectations? And the more you have this reality in your information, or you gather more information, you will be able to reduce the pains eventually in the future.
And George, what about you?
I would say communication. The more the stakeholders and the bigger the team, the harder or longer is to get to some point where you can confidently create a design, one that will propel the business. Most of the time I spend on a day-to-day basis is communicating, and most of the problems come from communication or miscommunication, for that matter.
Okay. So jumping to our last question, I think this is relevant to everyone here, like all the other questions, but this is particularly interesting. What resources do you recommend related with the topic, Ricardo?
I have two blogs here. One is Uncle Bob. Can I paste it on the chat?
Yes, please.
Okay. This should give you enough reading for some time.
Nice one.
And that's it.
Okay, thank you. And Jorge?
Yeah, I have DDD book, the Domain Driven Design book. It's a really nice read. Just take it with a pinch of salt. Don't try to apply it to every problem you find. Be critic, adapt, and really learn from other people and practice, as we mentioned before.
Okay. So I think this is it. It was a very nice conversation. If I may do a very, very short resume of this talk, I would say that a software architect is actually far, far away from the one shown in Matrix movies, where the single guy built all that all that thing and is the one in control. It's clearly a role that involves people, and it doesn't involve sightseeing and future prediction. Keeping it simple seems to be the way to go, and I think this is it. Embrace change, I guess. So I would like to thank Ricardo and Jorge for being with us today and sharing your knowledge. And once again, thanks to Porto Tech Hub and Scale Up Porto, and of course the community. From me, I think it's goodbye.
Thank you, Gonçalo, Jorge, and Ricardo. Ricardo, João Lajoso is asking for the link on the chat.
I think Ricardo sent me privately. Sorry.
Sorry. Okay.
I will send publicly.
Yes, so you can share it with everyone. Thank you so much for this moment, for sharing all this experience that you've been collecting. After this session, you'll be receiving an email, so you can provide us the feedback about this session. So please fill the form with the feedback. It's really fast. It takes only 2 minutes. And on the form, you have the opportunity to share with us other topics that you would like to explore in the future about this specific subject or other subjects that are related to these. So let us know your thoughts, share your feedback. Thank you all for being here, and there will be many more opportunities to keep this conversation going. Thank you, Jorge, Ricardo, Gonçalo, and of course, Porto Tech Hub. And to all of you for being here. Speak soon, guys.